Have you heard that Miss Marple and Agatha Christie's grandmother were one and the same person? Well, such insinuations were fueled by no one else than the writer herself. Yet how true that was in reality? In this video you will learn the real-life origins of the famous lady detective.
The shot sounded odd, so it took my attention.
Miss Jane Marple was an elderly spinster who solved crimes using analogies to English village life.
It's not good enough. We've got to know Heather's exact words.
Murder at the Vicarage was published in 1930, but I cannot remember where, when or how I wrote it, why I came to write it, or even what suggested to me that I should select a new character, Miss Marple, to act as a sleuth in the story. Certainly at the time I had no intention of continuing her for the rest of my life. I didn't know that she was to become a rival to Hercule Poirot. Agatha Christie shared detailed records of her writing and thinking process in her famous autobiography book. Just like with Poirot, whose story I told in the previous video, she gave tons of clues and uncovered interesting details about Miss Marple's prototypes in her own words. Interestingly, although the eccentric Hercule Poirot and the charming Miss Marple have never met on the pages of Christie's mysteries, it turns out that the Belgian private detective has actually ignited the first sparks of the portrait of his charming female counterpart. Christie described how it happened. I think it is possible that Miss Marple arose from the pleasure I had taken in portraying Dr. Shepherd's sister in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. She had been my favorite character in the book, an acidulated spinster full of curiosity, knowing everything, hearing everything, the complete detective service in the home. When the book was adapted as a play, one of the things that saddened me most was Caroline's removal. Instead, the doctor was provided with another sister, a much younger one, a pretty girl who could supply Poirot with romantic interest.
I saw something quite peculiar just now.
Really?
First of all, Ralph Peyton is here and staying at the White Hart.
Staying there?
Staying there? And he was talking to a girl.
Obviously, such a tasteless and daring intrusion into the beloved character insulted Agatha. Imagine you paint a picture of some particularly interesting, sophisticated and deep female character who adds up a lot to the perception of others, and then someone suddenly erases her for the fact that she is too old to be attractive enough for an average theatre goer, as some director thought.
No, Caroline. Poirot said just those people he named.
Well, I'll just drive you up there then, that's all. Hercule won't mind. I don't have to come in.
Ruthlessly, isn't it? Yet this precedent served as a perfect plan of revenge that was to be served cold. If you dare to get rid of my support character, I'll give her the key part. I think at that moment in St. Mary Mead, though I didn't know it yet, Miss Marple was born, and with her Miss Hartnell, Miss Weatherby and Colonel and Miss Bantry, they're all there, lined up below the borderline of consciousness, ready to come to life and step out onto stage. This way, the arrival of Miss Marple was somewhat unexpected and yet perfectly orchestrated. I wrote a series of 6 short stories for a magazine and chose 6 people whom I thought might meet once in a week in a small village and describe some unsolved crime. I started with Miss Jane Marple, the sort of an old lady who would have been rather like some of my grandmother's Ealing cronies, old ladies whom I have met in so many villages where I have gone to stay as a girl. And here it comes, the first notion of Agatha Christie's own granny in relation to the beloved character of Marple. The tip-to-toe Victorian Mrs. Miller was the mother of Agatha's father, and oddly an aunt of Christie's own mother, which earned her the family nickname of Auntie-Granny. Since my father had married the niece of his stepmother, his American father's English second wife, and since he called her mother, whilst his wife continued to call her auntie, she was usually known officially as Auntie-Granny. Raise your hand those who found it too difficult to understand this family relation. Her husband had business in the United States, which, according to Agatha, turned out to be one of the success stories of America. So she had been passing her life in Victorian contentment and lived to 92.
Do you feel, remunerated?
Not in the slightest. But I do feel rejuvenated.
Yes, of course.
There are a couple of funny episodes that Agatha describes with the utmost detail in her autobiography that highlight the key personal traits that her Auntie-Granny shared with Jane Marple. My brother and sister had had a tame squirrel as a pet in the house for about a year. When Granny, after picking it up with a broken paw in the garden one day, had said sapiently, "Mark my words, that squirrel will be off in the chimney one of those days." It went up the chimney 5 days later.
Did you know that pigs are the closest animals to men? Did you know that, Miss Marple?
No.
We've named all of ours after generals in the British Army.
Those powers of prophecy, second sight, and somehow a built-in sense of suspicion of everything and everyone were the traits Miss Marple definitely borrowed from Christie's grandmother. There was no unkindness in Miss Marple. She just didn't trust people. Though she expected the worst, she often accepted people kindly, in spite of what they were.
Which does rather...
Stick out your tongue. Say ah.
Ah.
Well, put it back.
Which does rather suggest poison.
I think we should leave that to the coroner, don't you?
Being an introverted type of person herself, Christie didn't aim for living a public life and sharing too much personal behind the scenes with the ever-curious public and journalists. Moreover, she always insisted that she wasn't used to inventing her characters out of real-life acquaintances, to quite a few exceptions, I must say. Perhaps that was the reason she had to correct herself later in the text, not to give that false impression that Marple is a proper portrayal of her granny. Miss Marple wasn't in any way a picture of my grandmother. She was far more fussy and spinsterish than my grandmother ever was. But one thing she did have in common with her: though a cheerful person, she always expected the worst of everyone and everything, and was, with almost frightening accuracy, usually proved right.
She was a simple soul, friendly enough. Bit of a bore, but you don't kill someone for that. If you did, there'd be no one left in the village.
Another difference is that Miss Marple never married, and her closest living relatives were her nephew and nieces, while that certainly was not the case for the writer's granny.
But
Hello, Aunt Jane.
my favourite nephew.
And just like with Poirot, Christie gave Marple some of her own features. For example, in The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, we learn that Miss Jane Marple knows drugs and poisons from her days at Bridgehampton Hospital during the war. Christie learned about poisons working at the Torquay Hospital dispensary during World War I.
There's the principal ingredient of it is,
Phenylethyl-malonylurea. I know it well from my days at Bridgehampton Hospital during the war. Mixed with alcohol, it causes respiratory depression, a drop in blood pressure, feeble heartbeat. Quite deadly, in fact.
Unlike in the case of Hercule Poirot, Christie never publicly shared the story of how she came up with the name of the female detective. There are a couple of tentative suggestions that she may have taken the name from Marple railway station through which she used to pass, or from Marple Hall, the countryside residence located near her elder sister Madge, Margaret Ward's home at Ebney Hall. The last idea looks more plausible, since it is known that Christie was very much fond of this ancient estate and based several of her novels on it. And this time again, much like with Poirot, Christie created herself troubles with her own hands when it comes to the age of the detective. Miss Marple was born at the age of 65 to 70, which, as with Poirot, proved most unfortunate, because she was going to have to last a long time in my life. Indeed, Miss Marple appeared in 12 novels and 20 stories, and imagine 41 years passed between the first story and the last one. The stories were published in England under the title of The 13 Problems and in America as The Tuesday Club Murders.
I think it would be a good idea, Miss Marple, if I dropped round later and had the whole story from you.
Oh, sure you're far too busy to listen to my little ideas, Inspector.
Just like with Poirot, there were numerous attempts to portray Miss Marple on screen. Margaret Rutherford in the 60s, Angela Lansbury in the single film in 1980, which then brought her the similar leading role of Jessica Fletcher in the American series Murder, She Wrote, and several actresses in the TV series, out of whom the great Joan Hickson is considered to be the canonical one. She starred as Jane Marple for 8 years from 1984 to 1992, and although Agatha Christie had no chance to see her in this role, it is still believed she would definitely get her approval. There is a curious historical anecdote that when in the 1940s Joan Hickson appeared on stage in another Agatha Christie play, Appointment with Death, she was seen by Christie, who then wrote her a personal note: "I hope one day you will play my dear Miss Marple." And it worked! In the next video, we shall rank all Miss Marple actresses of all epochs and pick the best one for the role. Subscribe not to miss it coming. People never stop writing to me nowadays to suggest that Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot should meet. But why should they? I'm sure they wouldn't enjoy it at all. Hercule Poirot, the complete egoist, would not like being taught his business by an elderly spinster lady. He was a professional sleuth. He wouldn't be at home at all in Miss Marple's world. No, they're both stars. They are the stars in their own right. I shall not let them meet unless I feel a sudden and unexpected urge to do so.
Of course, the vicar.
Although such an unexpected urge never came about, you now know that there was a hidden Poirot trace in the birth of the character of Jane Marple, who was largely based on the type of a prudent Victorian lady, similar to Christie's own grandma. And were there other real-life borrowings of personalities, places, events that gave the solid foundation for the writer's inspiration? Oh, there sure were! We'll uncover all of them in the next episode of this mini-series dedicated to Agatha Christie mysteries. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.
Well, I never would have guessed that ending. I mean, that girl, she looks so nice.
Human nature, Cherry dear. The world of the cinema, the village, it's all quite the same, really.